Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you are watching The World Report. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. After a brief standoff, Colombia has agreed to the unrestricted acceptance of migrants from the US, averting President Trump's 25% tariff threats. Colombia had prevented 2 migrant-filled military aircraft from landing in the country. Palestinians have begun returning to their northern Gaza homes after access was halted by Israeli forces. This comes as Hamas and Israel breach an agreement for 6 hostages to be released in 2 stages on Thursday and Saturday. A deal between Israel and Lebanon has been extended until February the 18th after the initial 60-day deadline passed. This follows the reported deaths of 22 Lebanese people by Israeli forces on Sunday. The M23 rebels in the Democratic of Congo say they have taken the city of Goma. As hundreds of thousands flee amid reports of the killings, the Congolese government has slammed the Rwanda for supporting the rebel group. Gunfire rang out across parts of Goma, the largest city in eastern Congo, just hours after a Rwanda-backed rebels said they had seized the city. The recent advance by the M23 rebel alliance has forced thousands in Congo's mineral-rich east from their homes. The claim came minutes before a 48-hour deadline it had given to Congolese troops to surrender their weapons expired. The DRC government said their advance was a declaration of war by Rwanda. M23 rebels have been locked in a conflict with the Congolese army and UN peacekeepers on Goma's outskirts for several days. Hours after the troops entered the city, a mass jailbreak took place at a prison which holds around 3,000 inmates. It was totally torched following the jailbreak that resulted in deaths, as per security. This came despite the United Nations Security Council calling for an end to the offensive. Earlier today, buses were standing by, ready to evacuate United Nations staff and their families from the besieged Congolese city. Kenya's President William Ruto announced an extraordinary East Africa Community Summit within the next 48 hours to discuss the crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Ruto said that both Rwanda's Paul Kagame and DRC's Felix Tshisekedi will take part in the summit. The battle for the key city is the latest chapter of fighting in the eastern DRC, a volatile area that has struggled with regional rivalries, ethnic disputes and armed militia conflicts for more than 3 decades, triggering one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. With us to discuss this is Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, former diplomat. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador Kapoor. I want to know about the strategic value of Goma specifically and why it matters so much that this M23 group have targeted it.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad you have brought up this for discussion because large part of Africa has been sought after by the forces of various countries over the different decades in the last century for their mineral wealth primarily and other resources. Now, the eastern part of Congo borders Rwanda, and Rwanda is trying to have its influence expanded on that zone, which is also very mineral rich. There are UN peacekeeping forces which are trying to enforce the peace but have not been very successful. They had managed to get the surrender of quite a few militants earlier who had surrendered their weapons, but again they have regrouped, and with active support from the Rwandan army, war has again broken out in that area. Kenya is trying to broker peace. The militants are known as M23 group, which is March 23. It's a complicated situation. It's going to take some time to get resolved. The UN chief is very concerned also, and there are demands in the United Nations to impose sanctions on Rwanda to bring this to a closure at the earliest possible, because 13 US soldiers have died, mostly from South Africa, some from Malawi, and including one from Uruguay. So there is a lot of international concern at this sudden outbreak of violence, and this is in the province of Kivu. Goma is the capital. It is very near the border with Rwanda, so it's very easy for Rwanda to send its troops in. It's denying that it is doing anything there, but the reports from the ground suggest that they are actively supporting the militants of M23 and creating more disruptions there. So the international community has to see how to bring this to a successful closure at the earliest possible.
Ambassador Kapoor, apologies for the interruption, but this is a conflict that isn't spoken about that much in the mainstream media, much like other African conflicts. What is going on specifically that affects the daily lives of those in the Congo right now, specifically in Goma?
Well, unfortunately, a large, part of the difficulties of Africa do not find mention in the mainstream narrative in other parts of the world and in the Western world, because they do not directly impact the daily life of the citizen in those countries. But it does impact very significantly the people living there in those areas, because their lives are turned upside down. Their possibilities of continuing in a peaceful manner to earn their livelihoods gets totally disrupted. So it's very important for the world to also give some time and attention to these very serious problems which are existing in one part of Africa or the other. Traditionally, it has been the case that most of the world continues to ignore these problems and look the other way and let things happen, or actively participate, like in the case of Belgium for the diamonds there, or France, or the US forces, or even Russia's Wagner troops. So many countries have been sending their, armed forces, fully equipped and armed, to try to support one side or the other to get access to the rich mineral resources of Africa, not bothering about the lives of the citizens in those areas. And that is why it is also, tainted, very tainted effort in terms of blood money, blood diamonds, etc., which reach the Western world, the Western consumers, through these intervention of these forces, which is completely contrary to the respect which those people in those areas are entitled to, and the dignity of life that they are entitled to.
Ambassador Kapoor, obviously we have had news of other regional East Africa countries, specifically Kenya's president, speaking out about this and calling for an emergency summit. What are the outcomes that we might be able to expect from this, if any?
Well, I think that is a very good effort, because if the African countries get together and keep on speaking out loud and try to make efforts, like Kenya is making, the president of Kenya, Ruto, he has been trying to get both these countries together, Rwanda and Congo, the heads of these countries, to a sort of a meeting in Kenya, so that they can thrash out the differences and not continue with this violence which has erupted in the eastern province of Congo. But that effort has to become an all Africa continent effort through the Organization of African Unity, for example, the OAS, for example. They have to get together. South Africa has to speak out. Nigeria has to speak out and support Kenya's efforts. So once you have the big countries of Africa speaking out, and because South Africa's troops have also been killed in significant numbers, that's the biggest contingent which has suffered the maximum casualties. I think 9 South African soldiers have died, and maybe 3 Malawian soldiers and 1 Uruguayan soldier. So all these countries who have a vested interest in keeping the peace there and in maintaining the focus on development, they have to get together. They have to bring these issues in the United Nations and make sure that these issues are resolved either on a pan-African basis or at the UN Security Council with sanctions on the country which is creating all the disruptions. Thank you.
Ambassador Kapoor, one last question. How for those that don't know, there are certain accusations between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. I was wondering if you could quickly explain those to people who don't know, and how do these accusations complicate the prospects of peace?
So, I have been actively involved with Africa since the mid-80s when I was looking after East Africa, and then I got posted. I was working on an assignment out of Tanzania for about 4 years, so I had possibilities to tour a large portion of the continent extensively and understand the region. Now here in Congo, the border between Rwanda and Congo is quite big, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which it is called, while Kinshasa, the capital, is on the western extreme. On the eastern extreme, the border exists between Rwanda and Congo. Rwanda falls almost within the East Asian side, but Central Africa. So both these countries have a shared border, and they have a lot of minerals in that area. Now, the people of Goma, the people of Goma, which is the capital of Kivu province, they are the ones who are suffering the most in this process, because Rwanda has sent its soldiers to support the militants so that it can lay a claim on the mineral riches in Kivu province and secure them for their own purpose and for their own benefit, and depriving the Congolese people from getting the benefit of those minerals. So that is why there is war. The M23, what happens in these wars is that there is some militants or some rebel forces which are trying to establish their hegemony or supremacy in that part of the world, because they know that the mineral riches are very profitable for exploitation by any country. So they will come into an agreement with foreign forces, whether they are forces of the Western countries, like I mentioned earlier, or with local forces of some other country, like Rwanda in this case, that if Rwandan army supports us, we will give them so many millions of dollars worth of access to these mineral resources. So Rwanda will then say, okay, we are sending in 5,000 soldiers, or we'll send in 10,000 soldiers. Now that sort of number in Africa is a very significant number for a province, because for the DR Congo to combat the militants who are homegrown militants of M23, combined with the strength of these Rwandan forces, becomes more and more difficult. So the province itself gets totally war zone, becomes a war zone, gets totally disrupted. The daily life gets disrupted. The education gets disrupted. The livelihoods get disrupted. The economic, all the activities get disrupted. So what happens is, just for the sake of getting your hands onto those mineral-rich, areas of Eastern Congo, you have Rwanda interfering and trying to lay its claim on that through the agency of the M23 militants and rebels. And that is what is currently happening in that part of Kivu. And that is what the international community also needs to try to see how to resolve it at the earliest possible, so that the invasion of the eastern province by the Rwandan forces is halted immediately. The UN peacekeeping forces are able to carry out their role without their soldiers getting killed, which is a very great tragedy, because the blue helmets are there to keep the peace. They are not there to fight any army or to fight other militants. They are there to prevent the militants from creating havoc, creating chaos, and creating violence.
Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your time. We've run out of time. We will now move to some news updates from the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Russia continues its advances in Ukrainian territory. Its defense ministry has announced the capture of Velyka Novosilka, a strategically important town in eastern Donetsk region, whereas Ukraine says that its troops have only strategically withdrawn from certain areas. This capture, if confirmed, would make Velyka Novosilka the first significant town to capture in 2025. A day prior, Ukrainian air defenses drowned 50 of 72 drones launched by Russia overnight. Additionally, Ukraine's General Staff of the Armed Forces said that forces struck an oil refinery in Russian region of Rwanda. The facility reported produces fuel for a Russian military jet. Elsewhere, Russian NGOs catering for the needs of war veterans and their families have claimed a suspension of US funding is forcing them to halt their work. This comes after newly sworn-in US Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced he would pause foreign aid grants for 90 days. Ukrainian President Vladimir Putin later claimed that military aid to Ukraine would continue, but did not clarify whether humanitarian aid had been paused. We are joined by our reporter, Aditya Wadwan. Aditya, what can you give us about these recent updates from the Russia-Ukraine war?
Well, Tom, as you can see, I mean, you know, Russia, the Ukraine defense forces are claiming that they have hit the drone storage facility of Russia, and you know, they have stuck important Russian installations, and you know, on the other hand, Russia has been striking Ukraine for quite some time. You know, what has happened recently since the new incoming Trump administration has taken the charge of the United States of America, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio has halted the foreign assistance, foreign aid that was being given to Ukraine as part of its 90-day halt of its foreign aid. You know, it is considered as a setback to Ukraine's growing military prowess against Russia to defend itself. You know, as per some reports, you know, what has happened, the Trump administration has also indicated that they are no more interested in the reconstruction work in the war-torn Ukraine, and they have given that work to some private company. So we see the entire situation, you know, it is not looking very good for Ukraine, because it was actually dependent upon upon the missile system and its defensive procurement on United States of America, and halting this foreign assistance for another 90 days is considered to be a setback for Russia. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has praised Donald Trump for not, you know, providing financial aid to Ukraine, and this needs to be seen as to how this entire scenario in the Russia-Ukraine war proceeds from here. Yes, Tom, back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, Aditya. We are joined for more on this discussion by Professor Alexei Haran, Professor of Comparative Politics at the University of Kiev-Molia, and Gilbert Doctorow, Russian affairs expert, live from Brussels. Professor Haran, I wanted to come to you on this first question. How does the reported fall of Velyka Novosilka affect Ukraine's military objectives in the Donetsk region, and how is Ukraine planning to regain strategic positions?
Well, definitely, I would say yes. We withdrawn from Velyka Novosilka, and it creates better possibilities for Russia to continue its slow but still movement further, you know, in Donbass. The question, when we are talking why it happens, you know, I think that in order to organize successful defense, we need more, definitely, we need more resources, including military resources. So in this sense, I would like to commend decision, well, to freeze for 90 days foreign aid support. As far as we understand in Ukraine, it doesn't include actually the military support. It's more about support. Definitely Trump may decrease it, but so far, you know, this military support is coming from other channels, not through the programs, definitely, of development. What is true is that the United States, yes, they stopped USAID, they stopped development programs in Ukraine for 90 days, and I would say definitely it's bad, you know, because this USAID support in Ukraine doesn't only include grants to NGOs, to free media, but it also includes very important areas of energy, of medicine, social sphere, which is really important in times of war. It's a bit surprising for us. Well, two countries are excluded from this freezing for 90 days. These are Egypt and Israel, which we may also understand why. But Ukraine is at war. It's not like other countries. It's under attack. So definitely we think it's not very just, to stop development programs for Ukraine. By the way, these are closed information, but it was discussed in press that American diplomats in State Department, they actually made a statement, closed statement to Rubio and others that support to Ukraine should be continued.
Gilbert Doctorow, I wanted to get your response of that, and I want to ask, how does the capture of Velyka Novosilka align with Russia's broader military strategy in eastern Ukraine?
Well, I'm glad you gave me that question because it touches directly on the meaning of the capture of that city. When my fellow panelist says that his country needs further military assistance. The military assistance material coming in from the West is useless to Ukraine if it cannot be brought to the front lines. And the capture of Velyka Novosilka, that is precisely the part of the strategy that the Russians are implementing very successfully now. This city was one of the main logistics hubs. The next city, and still greater target for Russian efforts, is Pokrovsk. And there you have the nexus, the rail lines, the truck lines, roads, which are supplying the front. If the front cannot receive supplies, then it's pointless to speak about anything else. It's wonderful that you and are informing your viewers about the losses that the Ukrainians are experiencing on the battlefield, but you are not alone. The fact is that mainstream in the West, the Financial Times, the New York Times, other major newspapers across Europe are daily reporting, reporting the serious reverses, the serious losses of manpower and of Western supplied equipment of the Ukrainians on the battlefield along the 1,200-kilometer long line of demarcation or separation of the forces. This is common knowledge. I salute Mr. Trump for, in his first week in office, by decree ending US government censorship. However, if nobody is reading or listening to the news that is available in mainstream, then what's the point of it all? The most important person not reading the news is Mr. Trump himself. He has been, in the last week, issuing utterly ignorant and foolish statements about the state of the condition of the war, that supposedly the Russians and the Ukrainians are in a stalemate and their lives are being lost for no purpose. Mr. Trump, open the newspaper and you will see it is not a stalemate. Listen to this radio station and you will, or television station, and you will know it is not a stalemate. The Russians are about to have a conclusive victory over the Ukrainian forces, and why on earth would they agree to a pause, which is what you think you are going to negotiate with Mr. Putin? You will not.
Professor Haran, can I please get your response to that, please? And then I want to talk about the successful interception of 50 out of 72 Russian drones, and how significant is this achievement for Ukraine?
Well, we have attacks from Russia almost every day. Actually, the photos which you see behind me is my vicinity, where I live. So that's what we have, cruel Russian bombardments of civilian cities and civilian objects. So, look, we intercept a lot of drones, but unfortunately not all. And that's why we need defense system to close our skies. I am really appalled. It seems to me that Mr. Doctorow, he is happy, about he would welcome Russian victory, the aggressor's victory. I don't understand why. And actually, when we are talking, that Russia is successful, Russia is winning the war, and so on and so forth. Let me remind you that Putin wanted to seize Kiev. And
I'm really sorry, we seem to have lost you, but we have also run out of time. We will now move to more news from across the world. Lebanon extends its ceasefire with Israel despite delays in troop withdrawal. As violence erupts in southern Lebanon, leaving 22 dead and over 120 injured, the UN warns that conditions remain unsafe for civilians returning home. Here is the full report.
Lebanon has extended its ceasefire agreement with Israel until February 18, 2025, despite Israel failing to meet the deadline for the withdrawal of its troops. On Sunday, violence erupted in southern Lebanon, resulting in the deaths of 22 people and injuries to 124 others. The Israeli military has stated that its forces opened fire on civilians who were attempting to return to their homes in villages still under Israeli occupation. However, tensions have continued to rise, with both parties blaming each other for delays in implementing the deal. In response to the ongoing violence, the United Nations has acknowledged that conditions are not yet safe for civilians to return to their homes, urging caution. Hezbollah has hailed the day as a glorious one, with many residents expressing their determination to return to their villages, despite the risks. The situation has drawn international attention, with French President Emmanuel Macron calling for the immediate withdrawal of Israeli troops still present in Lebanon. Meanwhile, Lebanese officials have vowed to continue supporting the safe return of residents, with the Lebanese military promising to protect them from Israeli attacks. Bureau Report, NewsX.
And that is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world.